Guys, welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we're going to be talking with Jarrett with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Before we get to that, I want to thank you guys, the listeners, for all your support that you give this podcast. I'd also like to thank the sponsors, Wilderness Athlete, Western Hunter, and Elk Hunter magazines, Phonescope.com, Outdoorsman's, Utah Hydrographics, and our title sponsor from the beginning, GoHunt.com Insider. Without those sponsors, I wouldn't be able to put the amount of time that I do into this podcast, and I just want to thank them for their monetary support. I also want to encourage you guys to support these companies. These are all great companies, and within this podcast, you'll hear promo codes using the J. Scott promo code with each of these companies. I encourage you to call them. I encourage you to talk to them, email them. Send them messages and use those promo codes. And I really appreciate the feedback that I get from you guys all the time. Different guys saying they use Wilderness Athlete products, different emails saying how much they love the the Western Hunter and Elk Hunter magazines. And I get emails from guys saying, phone scope adapters, how much they like them, and Outdoorsman's, and getting stuff dipped at Utah Hydrographics. So please send me those emails. I appreciate all of the support that you guys give me. You can email me at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. This podcast continues to gain momentum and support, and a couple 100,000 downloads per month. And we're just rolling along here, and we're going to have a big summer. I know everybody's getting prepared for upcoming fall hunts. I'm going to be getting ready for guided hunts, as well as I drew the archery elk permit in Utah, and going to be getting in shape, and going to be getting a new bow, and doing a lot of shooting, and just getting prepared so that I can be ready for my hunt, and I know you guys are too. You guys can follow along our adventures on Instagram at JScottOutdoors, my associate Dar Colburn at Dar Colburn. Also on our website, our guiding website, colburn&scottoutfitters.com. You can also go to jscottoutdoors.com on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. We've got I believe 2,700 and change subscribers. Every day we're getting new subscribers on our YouTube channel, and we're constantly updating the YouTube videos there. So check us out, J. Scott Outdoors on YouTube. And let's get right to this episode with Jarrett from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have Jarrett Babinsack of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and I'm excited to have Jarrett on to talk about some of the issues facing sportsmen on our public lands here in Arizona and across the western U.S. and across the United States for that matter. Jarrett, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Jay. How about you?
Good. I'm excited to have you on and talk about some of the issues that we have going on, and talk about Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Before we get into that, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and how you became a sportsman.
Certainly, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. So I grew up in northwest Indiana. I didn't move away from Indiana until after college. Hunting and fishing was still a big part of the culture. The community that I grew up in was still fairly rural at the time that we lived there. My dad was a hunter. My grandfather, my uncles all fished. Some hunted. My neighbors all hunted and fished. So it was really just a big part of my childhood. So, coming up, it was just a natural way of life. When, deer season rolled around, everyone went to the woods. We hunted for our food, and we fished all summer, and that was just part of my childhood. So it was, as natural as breathing or going to school or playing baseball as a kid. So it's just part of my life. And my first love, I would say, was whitetail hunting. I started when I was 12. I picked up a bow the next year and just fell in love with archery, and self-identify, I guess you could say, as a bow hunter. And that's really my biggest passion, outside of my wife and my kids is bow hunting. So from the time I was 13, that was my first year with a bow in my hand. Until now, that was my passion and love for the outdoors, was spending time in the woods with my bow. So that's a little bit about me and kind of how I got started.
As you were growing up and bow hunting, what was it about bow hunting that you think captivated you so much?
I guess I would probably say it's the same reason that I love hunting public land and doing, kind of solo adventure hunting. It's kind of the challenge and the solitude of it and the adventure of it. It's really, you and that weapon and the sport of archery is, it's challenging in that it forces you to master it. And if there's any type of, internal clutter in your head, or you're not focused, or, your form's not right, it's going to show in the flight of that arrow. And I think I fell in love with the challenge of it. I liked watching the flight of the arrow. It felt natural to me and just enjoyed it.
Growing up, did you have pretty good ground to hunt on, and did you have high interactions with animals, or was it a low target environment and not a high success rate area?
No, growing up, it's funny. I was just thinking about this the other day and talking to a friend of mine. It was pretty utopian, actually. We had hundreds and hundreds. I know it doesn't sound to a Western public land hunter, hundreds and hundreds doesn't sound like a big number, but when you're growing up in Indiana, hundreds and hundreds of acres was a lot for us. We had access to a lot of land, and it wasn't difficult to obtain that access. We were able to knock on a farmer's door, offer to give him a hand during the summer. You had access to acreage, or you knew someone who had a farm. My aunt owned a farm that had great habitat and quality deer on it. So we never lacked for places to hunt as a kid, and there were a lot of interactions and a lot of animals, and then as I got older and became high school age, and then into college, and now, especially looking back at that same area, there isn't that kind of habitat and there isn't that kind of access, and it's much more difficult to hunt, back across the Midwest and the East in my home state of Indiana. It's troubling.
Growing up, did you have opportunities to shoot does and bucks, or how do their seasons work, as far as, do they have specific doe seasons, specific buck seasons, or is it, archery specific or rifle specific? How does it work?
Yeah, so a ton of opportunities to shoot animals of either sex. The way that it works, so I moved back to Indiana 4 or 5 years ago and spent some time there for I think we were back in Indiana for 4 years, then moved to Colorado and then back to Arizona. And when we were back, most recently, I think I had property to hunt in 2 counties, and if I had maxed out my opportunity between antlerless and antlered deer, I believe I could have shot 12 deer that year. So there's definitely a population issue, and that loss of access to quality habitat to hunt has really driven the antlerless population, and some of this overcrowding around urban areas where, humans are butting up against these once natural wild habitat is, really creating major issues. So it's tough to keep up with the population there. I think if you're a hunter, especially a bow hunter, you really never run out of opportunity to chase animals.
And then as you transition to, growing up hunting in the Midwest, hunting Indiana for deer, then at some point in time, I believe you moved to Montana. Did you not? Or at least you moved out west. And what was the shock? Was there quite a bit of shock in moving out west and seeing all of the public lands that were available to hunt? And I'm just curious about your take on that.
Yeah, so as a kid, we took really one trip out west, and it was to Montana, and we went through the Dakotas, and my brother and I spent quite a bit on that time ditching the rest of the group and my family, and we picked up some fly rods and we went out and we hiked back into some different creeks and rivers to fish, and that was really my first time being exposed to these huge, wide open spaces. And in that moment, I knew that at some point I wanted to get back out west. I wanted to live out west. And coincidentally, during that same time period, that's really when, at least to my recollection, I started to really notice the change in, my home state of Indiana as things became subdivided in places where, I remember field dressing my first year, watching a field edge with my dad as a kid. Those areas now, when I would go home from school, were houses and developments or, off limits, or they were being leased to someone from Chicago or Michigan that had, more money, more resources than I did. And I fell in love with the big wide open spaces and the access and the opportunity and the sense of public ownership of the Western U.S. And so I knew at that point, once I got out of school, if I had the opportunity, I was going to move out west. And so that opportunity didn't come until quite a bit later. But in 2006, we moved to Arizona for work. And, I fell in love with it. We traveled all over the state. I don't think that we spent a single weekend here in the valley. We were camping and fishing. And we had to move back for work purposes back to Indiana. And in 2009, we moved back there. And it's even worse now than it was then. I think every acre of land that I had access to as a kid, including, probably for me, the most influential piece of property and the most special place to me, my aunt's farm, where I spent the majority of my time as a kid, it's all gone. It's either been privatized by someone who doesn't allow hunting, or it's been subdivided or developed. But that's hundreds or probably even into the thousands of acres that I hunted as a kid, where I became a hunter and became passionate about the outdoors, that just doesn't exist anymore. And so we had the opportunity to move back out west a few years later. We moved to Colorado for a year, actually, and really fell in love with hunting wilderness and the challenge of going at it alone and going into the backcountry solo. And, now here living in Arizona, it's the same thing. I have so much access and so much opportunity that as a kid growing up in Indiana would have been unfathomable as a kid.
What kind of hunts do you enjoy here in Arizona the most? Like, what are your favorite types of hunts that you've done?
So this was really my first year being able to get out and chase critters. So when we lived here the first time, I was working full time and we were starting a family and I was going to grad school. And so the number of hours I was able to actually spend outside chasing animals was pretty small. So we moved back about a year and a half ago to Arizona, and I'd say this last fall, chasing coos deer or cows deer, I'll say it the right way. Chasing cows deer was a real treat, and spending time in that country. It's unlike anything else that I'd ever hunted before, and I spent a lot of time down in southeast Arizona with some fellow members of BHA and some of our chapter leadership teams showing me kind of around and showing me the ropes when it comes to hunting whitetail. I'd say that was probably my favorite hunt from this past year. I haven't been fortunate enough to draw an elk tag, but if I do, I'm looking forward to chasing some elk here on my home turf as well.
Absolutely. Coos deer, cows deer, however you want to pronounce it. Cows is correct.
Yeah, I know.
But I say coos, Dar says coos, all the buddies I hunt with say coos, so whatever, coos, cows, they're unbelievable deer. I think what makes the deer so unbelievable too is some of the country that they live in, from, Ocotillo Flats, down in the cactus, all the way up, the yellow grass, the oak trees, the mesquite, all the way up into the pines, and pretty neat and unique little deer, quote unquote, but pretty fascinating in their own right, with their behavior. And one question I would ask you, being a Midwest hunter growing up and then getting to observe the Coues deer, what similarities do you see in the deer that you grew up loving and these deer here in Arizona?
A lot, actually, and maybe that's part of the reason why I fell in love with it so quickly this fall, was because it, gave me that warm, fuzzy feeling of chasing whitetails back home and rekindled that a little bit. But I think that the rut behavior, especially where I spent a few days out in January during the rut, and the rut behavior was very similar. They responded to calls, and they behaved much the same way that the deer did back home. So I thought that was familiar. Obviously the looks of the critters are fairly familiar, but the country they live in and the amount of glassing and patience that goes into it, and the amount of ground that you cover with your eyes, is certainly different than the type of hunting that I did back home, where, some of the tree stands you'd be hunting and you'd be lucky if you could see a couple 100 yards each direction. Seeing in some of these big open vistas and this beautiful country down in southeast Arizona, it's pretty remarkable. It's really pretty country.
For sure. And were you able to encounter the other game animal in southern Arizona that everybody likes, and that's the javelina?
I went out in February. Unfortunately, I injured my shoulder this year and tore the labrum in my shoulder and sprained my AC joint, and so I wasn't able to hunt with my bow. So I took my lever action 45-70 out, and in a few days was able to kill a javelina, and that was my first time hunting a javelina, and it was a blast. Yeah,
they're pretty neat little animals for sure, and they in their own right have their own unique characteristics and areas that they like to live in, and for people that haven't hunted them, they're, in my mind, way more than just a little pig. They're just a really cool animal, and they're very bow hunting friendly. It's, if you're going to take people out sometime on a first hunt, certainly a javelina is a great hunt for that, because you're usually in some pretty neat country. Usually you see quite a few of them, and they're pretty stalkable without they don't have incredible eyesight. They've got great noses, but just a fun animal to bow hunt. Let's take a quick break here, and then I want to dive into BHA.
GoHunt.com Insider is by far the most valuable tool a Western hunter could give themselves. They are the industry leader and number one source for Western hunting for a lot of reasons. They have changed the game for how hunts and hunting information is found. Within a matter of minutes, using Filtering 2.0, you will be able to filter by state, species, residency, odds of drawing a tag, specific hunting dates, and harvest success percentages to find the hunts that fit exactly what you're looking for. If you are a guy that applies across the West or just in your home state but want to find some new opportunity, there's no better way to do it than using GoHunt.com Insider. As an exclusive offer to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast listeners, if you sign up for an Insider membership and use the J. Scott promo code at checkout, you'll receive a $50 gift card to KUIU to use towards whatever you would like. Head on over to GoHunt.com/insider and get yourself the most valuable membership a hunter could have. Since 1982, the Outdoorsman's in Phoenix has made it their goal to provide the very best customer service combined with the latest and greatest optics and accessories in the business. Outdoorsman's is the leading designer and manufacturer of high-quality tripods and mounting accessories for any hunter's optical needs. Go to outdoorsmans.com or call 1-800-291-8065 and use the J. Scott promo code to receive 10% off all Outdoorsman's packs and pack accessories.
Jarrett, I want to transition into who and what is BHA.
So,
and I guess I should say, sorry to interrupt you, BHA is Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Go ahead.
We see ourselves as the sportsman's voice for our wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. That's kind of our mantra, mission statement. We're a grassroots organization, very member-driven. and we're a public lands advocacy group. So we were started around a campfire in 2004 in Oregon by a group of sportsmen. And the impetus really was, at that point in time, there wasn't another organization working on behalf of public land hunters, especially when it came to national and state policy. And so in that moment, they decided that on the landscape, there needed to be an organization because we were underrepresented when it came, to those important policy decisions that were either being made at the state level or in Washington. We really didn't have anyone advocating on our behalf to make sure that our voice was being heard when those discussions were being. So that was really the start of BHA as an organization, and today we work on very similar things, and if I had to put it into a couple of buckets, it would be access and opportunity would be a primary thing that we work on. The second thing would be conservation habitat, and that's really around policy and protecting and preserving special places and place-based conservation. And then the third bucket would be fair chase, which I think everyone would agree is something that we need to be mindful of, especially as technology and things continue to, pervade the landscape and pervade hunting, that we kind of self-police and self-monitor that a little bit to make sure that the hunting and fishing heritage that all of those that came before us and the people that are doing it now work so hard to protect, that perpetuates into the future.
So BHA is a membership-driven organization, or how does it work?
It is a membership-driven organization. So we're a 501c3. We have members in all 50 states in the U.S. We're probably not, we're definitely stronger from a there's no surprise because the majority of our public land and the majority of public land hunters reside out west. And we have a very active, engaged, and accountable membership base. We have a lot of influential sportsmen among our membership: Steve Ranella, Randy Newberg, Remy Warren, Hal Herring, and many, prominent corporate partners as well, Under Armour, Timber, Leupold, Weatherby, Vortex Optics, Sonics Maps. A lot of people that value public land hunting, both for, business and for their own personal interest, value the work that we're doing. They see the importance in the kind of work that we're doing, and they step up to support us.
Let's talk about access and opportunity, and where BHA is stepping in and making a difference in regards to access and opportunity.
This really takes place on two levels. So you have the bigger picture policy things that happen, at a federal level, like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or, different sportsmen and conservation pieces of legislation at the federal level. And so that we want to make sure that we're actively involved in those processes, and that the public land hunter and fisherman has a voice in those discussions. And then at the state and local level, you have place-based conservation, where, we're working with our membership. Our membership is really integral in identifying these potential threats or opportunities to protect these places. And so then we work through our local chapters and our membership to try to protect special places, or work together with other user groups to come up with multiple use plans that protect those places while still serving the interest of everyone that's at that table. We really want to be that voice for discussion and compromise when it comes to trying to figure out the best course of action, the best plans to protect these places.
Isn't one of the challenges with an organization like BHA and other conservation organizations is that sportsmen are somewhat fractured, and, while I may be a member of Trout Unlimited and a member of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, at times those two organizations, or other organizations as well, are not in agreement with each other. And so I would think, trying to gather everybody together for a common goal or a common good is at times challenging. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, that's probably an understatement, huh? So, yeah, there are a lot of organizations, whether that's the animal-based organizations, some of what you just mentioned. There's other organizations working on just a multitude of topics, but I would say that there are a few issues and a few areas of common ground that are really pretty galvanizing, and the biggest one among those being the public lands issue and the public lands transfer or public land grab issue right now. BHA is a member of the Arizona Sportsmen for Wildlife Conservation. That's multiple user groups, multiple 501c3 organizations that all belong, and we just had a meeting here recently, and that issue in particular is something that's galvanizing. So why we might split hairs over some of the how, what, and why of hunting when it comes to public land and it comes to some of these bigger issues like habitat, I think that's where we do our best work, and I think that's where people kind of put their swords away or put their agendas away, and we can all come together to make sure that the best interest, the future of our sport is being represented and protected. So I would say yes on maybe some of the more topical things or some of the more nuanced discussions on the fringe, but when you're talking about these bigger issues that are imperative to all of us, I would say sportsmen in general do a pretty good job of coming together, and you see that through the history of conservation. When the real threats arise and when someone's coming for something that we all hold near and dear, we group together pretty quick and we group together pretty strongly.
I know in the debates, the presidential debates on both sides, Republican and Democrat, there's been talk about, making public land or federal land and giving it over to the states and letting the states manage the public lands as opposed to the federal government. And I was curious as to your take and or BHA's take on that issue, and maybe if you could kind of talk about both sides of the issue and for the listeners out there that aren't aware of what's going on.
Yeah, sure thing. Obviously very topical right now, and looking at it from my vantage point, and probably I would say if you pulled our team at BHA from everyone's vantage point, this is the number one threat right now is the public land grab movement. And so when I look at this as a U.S. citizen, we're all public landowners. We all own these public lands. I think one of our greatest birthrights as Americans is these huge tracts of public land that we all have the ability and opportunity to recreate on, whether that's hunting and fishing or, mountain bikes or using our OHVs or whatever it is. We have these big, huge, wide open tracts of land. You don't see that anywhere else, really. And so when I look at this discussion, I look at it from the standpoint of we're all public landowners. And so what the folks that are on the side of, quote unquote, giving it back to the state, I guess first to address that piece of it was never owned by the state. So at statehood, each one of these states was given X number of parcels of land, and those lands were designated as state trust lands, and those state trust lands were to be used to raise money for the public school system. So if you look at whether it's here in Arizona or really any state across the West, if you look at the state trust land website or their mission statement, it's in their bylaws that the number one purpose of those state trust lands is to raise money for the state trust land coffer, so its highest monetary benefit. When you look at public lands, which are public lands, are lands that are owned by all of us, held in trust, and managed by a variety of federal agencies, whether that's National Forest, BLM, etc. Those lands are mandated to be managed for multiple use, which means we all have a seat at that table, and our voices are all important, and those lands belong to all of us. They don't belong to one special interest group. And so the proponents of this land transfer have done a really nice job of trying to frame the discussion in federal versus state. And obviously, in the current political climate, federal is going to become a dirty word. So people hear federal versus state, and the first inclination is to say, well, yeah, of course, it's better if it's managed at the state. The state's closer to it. The people here on the ground can manage it better. We have a better idea of what needs to take place. And in theory, that might be true. But what we're really talking about here is two different types of land. If that federal land is transferred to state ownership, it's not public land anymore, it's state land. And as I just said, state land has to be managed for highest monetary benefit. So if that land has to be managed for highest monetary benefit and it's no longer managed for multiple use, who's to say what happens to that land? First, we no longer have a seat at the table. As sportsmen, our voices are moot. We're not part of those discussions anymore. And if you went to the Arizona State Trust Land website right now, for example, and really any state, I was looking at a few of them yesterday and just looked at the sale and auction listings, you can see just how much of that state land is being sold off. I'd say if you look across the West, Nevada is a great example. They started with, I think, about 3 million acres of state land, and right now they retain 3,000 acres of that original 3 million that they were given at statehood. So they've sold.
Not in Arizona,
No,
but another state.
This
right.
is Nevada, yeah.
Right.
So that's just kind of a cautionary tale of what can happen when states control what happens to that land. The beauty of the public land system is that we all have a say. It can't just be sold. It can't be managed for one special use without there being some discussion around that management plan. Those are all negotiated. They're all negotiated transparently. Whereas when the state owns the land, it's a completely different story. And so one question I would have with that is I've heard both sides of the argument, but one of the interesting things is it possible, and I'm just asking the question, is it possible for the feds to give the land back to the states, but not in the same capacity as quote unquote state land, which I'm looking here at the website, and it has the specific reasons for the state land. Right.
Is it possible that they could give it back to the states, but in a capacity that it is public lands, it is not the same as state lands, and that these lands are never to be sold off? I know the argument on both sides, and I think the other side would argue that once it becomes state land, that then eventually they'll worm their way in, whoever that is, but whoever that is going to worm their way in and eventually try and make those parcels for sale.
Right.
But maybe a happy medium would be if there was a way, because I believe that someone from Washington, D.C. does not know anything about land in Arizona. But that's why they create the BLM and the Forest Service and other federal mandated, agencies that are here on the ground and, I think doing a pretty good job of managing our public lands. But maybe a happy middle ground would be somehow that the feds could give the land over to the states, but make it where it was, public land. I think one of the challenges with that is, in my mind, doesn't someone in Iowa or someone in Tennessee or someone in Florida own the federal land in Arizona just as much as someone that lives in Arizona? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. You follow what I'm saying? I mean, it's public, so everybody owns it.
Yeah, that's a lot of questions. So let's kind of start with could it be potentially transferred to the state of Arizona, let's say, or any state in the West to be managed better locally? I suppose in theory it could. The problem that I see with it today is that that's not what's being asked for or politicked for, whatever word you want to use. Right now, what's being asked for is an outright transfer. And you said something kind of earlier in the question, and when I hear this, it kind of gets my hackles up a little bit with the idea of getting it back. the state's never owned this land. This is never their land to begin with. This was always to be held in public trust, and this goes to the point you were making about doesn't the guy in Iowa or Tennessee have just as much a sense of ownership, or should he have just as much a sense of ownership of, maybe up an acre in the Pine Mountain Wilderness here in Arizona? I think absolutely, and that's how I feel about it. I think that's how everybody should feel about it. But unfortunately, I think that's not how everybody feels about it, and I think that's why ideas like this transfer of land to state ownership is able to gain traction out east, and it's able to gain traction in Washington, or it's able to gain traction with people in Texas, because they don't have this sense of ownership. And maybe it's because they haven't used it the same way that we have. They don't have this deep emotional, sentimental connection to it. It doesn't provide food for them and their family. It doesn't, provide land for them to graze. It doesn't do these things for their personal or professional sense of well-being or their lifestyle that it does for all of us who live in the West, or the people that live in the East and recreate in the West and come out West and love these places the same way that we do. So to go back to your first question about could that potentially be an option? Yeah, I've heard actually one person talk about that more middle of the ground approach. I was listening to another podcast, and it was I can't remember the gentleman's name off the top of my head, but it was someone running for governor in the state of Montana, not the sitting governor, but someone looking to run for governor, and he offered the idea of, can we figure out a way where these lands are, the deed isn't transferred, ownership remains the same, but we have better plans to manage them, utilizing more input from the folks on the ground. And I would say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And I think more conversation needs to take place, not just around sportsmen's issues, but in general, in the middle. I think as a society, we become very polarized. It's, you're either with me or against me, or either on this far side of this idea or this far side of either yes or no, where, that's not where compromise takes place. That's not where the best answers come from. It's usually when people can sit down, check their egos, and have, intelligent, nuanced conversation around compromise and around how do we best do this. The problem that I see right now, again, is that's not what's being asked for. What the folks that are on the side of proposing these land transfers, they're not interested in better land management. They're interested in monetizing. And when the land, let's say, was to be managed better via some type of better management between the feds and the state, that ultimately doesn't serve the purpose. If you look at, and I hate to say this, but it kind of always goes back to follow the buck or follow the dollar. If you look at the money that's financing the proponent of the public lands transfer, it's big money. It's the Koch brothers and their ilk. It's people that only benefit if this reaches its end, and that end being the eventual sale of these lands. If they're never liquidated, they have really no vested interest. They certainly don't have a vested interest in making sure that it's managed for better multiple use of folks like you and I. They benefit when that land gets sold. So, their pot of gold at the end of this rainbow is it's transferred to the state. Right now, the federal agencies can't afford to manage it because their budgets are being starved, whether that's through lack of financing or the fact that they're responsible for fire suppression. And it's, no secret looking across the West every summer that lots of stuff burns, and that's a huge cost. And so dollars that are earmarked for road maintenance or trail maintenance or habitat management or prescribed burns or whatever vehicle to better manage these lands, that money gets chewed up pretty quick when a fire starts. And so if the land was to be transferred to the state, those problems don't just disappear. They come with it. And so now they become the state's issue. And when you look at the financial picture across a lot of these states, it becomes clear pretty quick. And several objective third-party economists who are a lot brighter in this particular area than me have concluded the same thing, and that's the states can't afford it. So that land gets transferred. Now it's the state's responsibility. The state's sitting there with this land with the same problems that it had before they got it. They can't afford to manage it. Then what happens to it? Well, it gets sold. And when it gets sold, we all lose. I mean, once that land's sold, and this is coming from personal experience as someone who grew up in Indiana and watched a lot of places that I held near and dear to me and that, you know, helped frame who I became as a sportsman, disappear. That you can't go back from that. So if those lands are transferred and then eventually sold, that's a no-win proposition for all of us, and it's, you know, something we can't undo.
Yeah, it's all good points. Let's take a quick break here. Utah Hydrographics is in the water transfer printing service, and they are open to whatever you can dream up. Choose from a wide range of camo patterns, designs, and colors. Whether it's guns, bows, tools, rifle stocks, vehicles, steering wheels, fenders, dashboards, paint guns, fishing rods, cups, tripods, watches, knife grips, helmets for a local sports team or for your motorcycle, picture frames, mailbox, animal skulls, you name it, they can probably do it. Utah Hydrographics loves taking things that are general looking and turns them into something that looks fantastic and eye-popping. Give them a call and see what they can do for you and receive up to a 10% discount by using the JScott16 promo code. Visit them at utahhydrographics.com or on Instagram at Utah Hydrographics. Whether you are interested in elk, deer, antelope, bighorn sheep, or moose, Western Hunter and Elk Hunter magazines will bring the adventure to your mailbox. These publications feature articles on the finest hunting gear, tips and tactics from experienced hunters, field judging trophies, glassing techniques, calling strategies, and much more. To become a more knowledgeable and skilled hunter, subscribe today. Go to westernhunter.net/jscott and enter your email address for a chance to win a $1,500 credit towards any Swarovski product. Jarrett, in talking about public lands and these lands being held in public trust, is there one group or another that has more right to public land than the other?
No, and I think that's the beauty of it. Right, so it's to be managed for multiple use, and so that land's there for all of us. And I think where the right answer comes in how these lands are managed, again, it goes back to having good, intelligent, nuanced discussion where you bring everybody who has a vested interest in that land. You sit down at the table and you figure it out. And so we've been involved in numerous discussions or numerous planning sessions like this where we sat down with OHV users and with mountain bikers and ranchers, and we all sit down and we decide, okay, maybe it's not going to be ultimately the ideal outcome for anybody, but it's going to be an outcome that's better than the alternative and something that works for everyone at the table. And I think that's where the future of conservation is, and that's the kind of work that needs to be done going forward. So a long-winded answer to your question, no, I don't think anyone has more right to a particular piece of land than anybody else.
Wasn't there a while back the OHVs, there was some huge issues with the OHVs and, you know, how much ground they were just driving over and creating new roads, and that whole issue just blew up. And I think from that, I had heard some rumblings that BHA was an environmental group, and that was, you know, it all of a sudden turned into, you know, us against them and what have you. And I would just ask you to comment on that.
Sure. So I'll ask you a question today. So you're a hunter. Do you get irritated, or do you take exception to someone who poaches being prosecuted or being held accountable for their actions?
The question is, do I say it again?
So would you take exception? Let's say a guy goes out and poaches an elk, and that person's prosecuted, that person's held accountable for his actions. Is that something that that offends you as a hunter?
No, I think they should absolutely, if they're breaking the law, then they should face the law head on, and they should be prosecuted.
Right. So I consider that person as a poacher. You know, he broke the law. And so the thing that has always kind of baffled me about the OHV use, or the OHV conversation in particular, is that, okay, yeah, so the guy poaches, he gets prosecuted. Obviously, as a hunter, you're not offended by that because that guy's not a hunter, he's a poacher. OHV users, I look at this the same way. I've used OHVs. I have a Jeep Wrangler that I take to the trailhead, but I don't drive down the trail. I park it at the trailhead. So as an OHV user, if someone doesn't abide by the laws and they're not playing the game by the rules and they disregard that trail sign and they maybe drive down a creek bed or into some, elk habitat, let's say, and that person's caught and they're prosecuted as a legal, responsible OHV user, I don't see where I would be offended. And BHA's position, we're not anti-OHV. We're not anti-four-wheel drive. Every one of us has a four-wheel drive vehicle. A lot of us own OHVs. So our issue is with that illegal use. And that's it. So we're proponents of legal OHV use. The reason that is because of the habitat destruction, loss of opportunity, the impact to the wildlife in those areas that illegal OHV use.
Yeah,
that's a huge issue. And you said, you had read about it a while back. I would say this is an ongoing issue across the West.
Jarrett, what other issues do you see that are a problem, quote unquote, for sportsmen and for public land owners that are going on right now?
Well, I think we were talking about one of them, and that's the responsible OHV use piece of it. I think the OHVs, much like some of the new technology, has become pretty pervasive, and I think there's a place for a lot of this, but I think it comes down to self-policing and making sure that we're always behaving on, in the best interest of the habitat and the animals. So I think, when you look at the OHV piece we were just talking about, you look at the ramifications of irresponsible or illegal OHV use, and you look at animal security and the impact to clean water, the habitat destruction. Those are big issues, and I think it's something that we can have a very positive impact on if we do that right. The second thing would be the public lands piece. As sportsmen, a lot of us are necessarily the most outgoing people by nature. We like to, do it ourselves. We like that solitude. That's the reason that we gravitate to being outside, right? So coming together and trying to get a group of divergent opinions or people that might not necessarily gravitate to working in a group is a hurdle for us, and I think we need to do a better job bringing those people together, bringing our the hunters and anglers together, and getting everyone to work against common causes, against these big issues where we all can find common ground. I think the public lands one is a big one, especially if you're coming into the election season. It's incumbent upon all of us to understand what's at stake here and where each one of the politicians that we're thinking about voting for, where they stand on these issues, because it's not just going to impact us; it's going to impact our kids and future generations. So I think that's probably another big opportunity for us, is to figure out ways to come together and work, even when it's maybe not necessarily the easiest thing to do.
For sure. Do you think that BHA's stance on public lands is keep public lands public? You're not necessarily talking, or BHA's not necessarily talking about private land that's already private, that is not public, it's not state, it's private land. Is BHA's stance in any way that should not be private land and that should be public land? Because I think in a way sometimes backcountry hunters and anglers get a quote unquote bad rap for trying to come across that people that own a ranch, so to speak, that's, totally deeded private acreage, that backcountry hunters and anglers want to make that public because that should be public. I just curious to hear, your take on private land that a family 5 generations has owned, and how that is, I've kind of heard scuttle before and people getting all fired up about, this ranch or that ranch that is private land. I'm curious what BHA's take is on private land, and are they trying to make those lands public?
No, interesting, Jay. I really hadn't heard this before you and I talked, and absolutely not. We're a proponent of private owners' land rights. We have a number of our members are ranchers, private landowners. When we were talking earlier, I didn't set foot on a piece of public land until pushing 30 years old. So my entire youth and early adulthood growing up as a hunter was all on private land, and I still hunt quite a bit on private land. So no, we're not proposing or lobbying for any public or we're not trying to
private.
I don't know. We're not trying to undo the privatization. I'm not really sure how to say that, but no, we're not advocating that we need to make private lands public lands, or that somehow private land is the boogeyman or is a bad thing. That's not it at all. And I think this isn't really our wheelhouse, but groups like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, there's groups there that work with these landowners if they want to establish conservation easements or they want to protect these private lands in perpetuity, whether that's for historical purposes. They want to make sure these lands, stay ranches in perpetuity, or that these lands are managed for, as public land for access and opportunity for hunters and anglers. There's groups out there working with conservation-minded private landowners to help them do those things, and I'm certainly a proponent of that. And we're all proponents of that type of activity when a private landowner wants to take that initiative themselves. But if they're a private landowner, we respect the rights of private landowners. A lot of us are private landowners. Where our wheelhouse is advocating on behalf of public landowners and trying to keep public lands in public hands. We take the view to an earlier part of our conversation that we're all public landowners, that each and every one of us in this country owns these public lands, and it's special to who we are as Americans. And we believe that deserves our best efforts to protect and perpetuate that into the future. And that really has nothing to do with stepping on the rights of private landowners or trying to turn private land into public land. That's never been part of our history. It's not something that we've ever done, and not something that we'll be doing in the future.
Have you guys heard about PhoneScope? PhoneScope is a privately held company that makes custom molded, precisely engineered smartphone digiscoping adapters. Photographing wildlife has never been easier. Take digiscoping photos and videos from your smartphone and share them with your friends. PhoneScope stands behind their product with a 100% money-back guarantee. PhoneScope is the future of digiscoping. Get yours now. Use the JScott16 promo code and receive 10% discount on all purchases. Check them out at PhoneScope, that's PhoneSkope.com, or on Instagram at PhoneScope. Wilderness Athlete is committed to improving the health and quality of life for the outdoor athlete by providing field-tested, scientifically validated nutrition and sports performance products. Check them out at wildernessathlete.com and use the JScott promo code to receive 10% off any order.
I think one of the things that I think about when these issues come up and we talk about public land and then we talk about who gets to use the land, one of the things that scares me a little bit is, and I'm curious how BHA would handle this, is, as our country gets more, non-hunters, non-sportsmen, not using those public lands, and more people move into the cities, and the more population in the cities, it seems like they end up making the rules and trying to enforce the rules, and they've never spent any time out on public lands. The challenge that I think we'll face sometime, whether it's 50 years from now or 100 years from now, is when the groups that don't hunt, or against hunting, or against fishing, against sportsmen, decide that the public lands and that hunting and fishing, one particular group of users, sportsmen, shouldn't be allowed to do that on the public lands. And I'm curious what BHA's stance would be on that. And I think it's a challenge. I think it's an issue that we're all going to face sometime, whether it's in your and I's lifetime, or our future's lifetime, our kids' lifetime. When a strong advocate of anti-hunting becomes so powerful that they say, no more hunting and fishing on public lands, we could all be in trouble, because the BLM and the Forest Service and the people that manage the public lands right now have kind of their own rules and regulations at times, and they butt heads with different users of the land. Just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and it's obviously changing population dynamics. The urbanization of the United States, and it is definitely an issue that we all have to be mindful of, and something that we need to be paying attention to. And I've heard others talk about this in various forums about defensible spaces for hunters, and the different they've pulled the non-hunters, or really mostly non-hunters, but anti-hunters as well, about their feelings on hunting. And when you talk about hunting for meat, it's overwhelmingly positive. The non-hunting public supports that. They think that's a great idea. When you start to get into some of the other practices that are maybe more on the fringe of who we are as hunting and fishing, then it becomes a little bit, they become less supportive because they don't understand it. And I think, really from a big picture perspective, we've lost our way, as a society when it comes to our connection with our food. And so that urbanization, the going to the supermarket to pick up a piece of, cellophane wrapped meat for dinner, they're so far removed from how that meat ended up on their plate or ended up in their shopping cart. Whereas those of us that choose to participate in the circle of life, that choose to go out and hunt and fish and provide for our families and take a more active participant role in that process, we're connected to it. So I think, success for us in the future lies in how do we bridge that gap? How do we reestablish that connection to our food? And I think if we can reestablish that connection to our food, we'll do a better job of keeping those folks that live in these urban environments that maybe don't ever have any desire to get into hunting or fishing. If they can see that connection to food, and they can understand the connection to food, and they can understand our reasons for hunting and the rationale behind it and the motivations behind it, then I think we'll do a better job of keeping those people in our camp. When you look at some of the crazy stuff that came out over like the Cecil the Lion stuff, or some of these other things where everyone was just up in arms over an animal being killed by a hunter, that we were pretty far at that point removed from the food conversation. And so when people can't make that direct correlation to our motives, and when they start to question the motives, that's when people get turned off to the idea of shooting and killing an animal. When they can see that connection to food, and they can see the connection to our motivations are very clear, and we do a good job of articulating our motivations, I think we do a good job of keeping those people in our camp.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I wanted to ask you a question about fair chase. That is the third proponent that the in the quote unquote mission statement, fair chase. And what are some issues that you see as under the fair chase? What things have backcountry hunters and anglers as a group tried to mitigate or get rid of or oversee and make sure that things don't get out of control?
Gotcha. So probably the most recent example would be drones, and that's something that we've worked on, and I believe we have drones now banned for the use of hunting and scouting, I think in 8 or 9 states now, and that's really been us working directly with our membership, with state organizations, with Game and Fish, to propose and put into place some, common sense rules around using drones. I think high fence hunting is another thing that we work on in another area where we feel that crosses into something that no one would really consider fair chase. And in this conversation, something we could probably talk a whole hour on, because, when you start to get into some stuff where it might be more regional, or it might be kind of more on the fence where it's personal preference, it can become heated and it become really personal, and the opinions can become really divergent really fast. And in those things, it's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about those obvious fair chase issues. We're talking about the things that potentially represent a threat to, the future of hunting and angling. And so, the two I just mentioned are high on our list and something that we're going to keep working against.
Gotcha. And how do people join and find out more about backcountry hunters and anglers?
So you can find us pretty much on any social media platform. You can go to our website. What I would encourage, if you're interested in getting involved with backcountry hunters and anglers, that you connect with someone in your local state. As I had mentioned earlier, we're really membership driven. We're a very grassroots organization. We have a lot of different, whether it's a happy hour or events taking place to raise money in the state. A lot of the good work that we're doing is happening on the ground. So if you are interested in getting involved with BHA, find us on one of those channels, send us a message on Facebook, reach out to us through our website, but try to get connected with someone that works in your state. We've got great volunteer chapter leaders that would love to get you involved. Just take the initiative, reach out for us, and we will make sure to hook you up with the right person in your home state and get you engaged in what we've got going on.
How many states would you say, do you have, local groups or in each state? Do you have all 50 states yet? Or
no, we don't have chapters in all 50 states yet. I think we're hovering around the 17 or 18 mark. But the thing that we've seen recently is we've just seen an explosion in growth with our membership at BHA, and not just in the West, but across the East. So we have a chapter in Minnesota now, and we're doing great work on protecting the boundary waters there currently. We have budding chapters in Wisconsin, in Michigan. We have growing membership in Texas, and actually spent time on the phone with 3 or 4 guys from Texas last week who want to start a chapter. That state has less public land than any other state in the United States. So around this public lands issue in particular has been galvanizing for people, and it's drawing people to BHA. But across the West is traditionally where we've been strongest. But we're growing across the board right now. So if you're sitting in the East listening to this podcast, we need your help there too. And the same thing out here in the West, we definitely can use your help.
And on Facebook, you're under Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. I believe you also have an Instagram account. And what's the website?
So it's backcountryhunters.org is our website.
Okay. And are you the head person here in Arizona?
Yeah, so I'm the chapter coordinator for Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico. And then we have another guy, Ty Stubblefield, who's the chapter coordinator for the rest of it. And then, we've got a whole team of folks working on, BHA's behalf in our headquarters in Missoula, Montana.
Gotcha. Well, I really appreciate you being on. Are there any things that you think we didn't cover in this podcast that you want to make sure listeners know and hear?
No, I think we covered a pretty wide gamut. The thing, maybe the parting thought I would be really one with is, now's our time to get involved and to step up and make sure that our hunting and fishing heritage and our public land hunting heritage is being protected, not just, for our own use here in our lifetimes, but for future generations. This stuff isn't new. There's always threats on the horizon or ongoing. And the guys that came before us left us with this public land hunting and fishing heritage, and they left us with these opportunities. And I think we owe it to, I got involved because I feel like I owe it to my daughters, and I want this to be around for them and for their kids. And so I would say, if you've been on the sideline, maybe you're just paying your dues to whether it's BHA or any organization, get involved. We need more hunters and fishermen to take an active role in the process. It's maybe not fun. It's, bureaucratic, and it's messy, and it can seem daunting and overwhelming at times. So we need more people to step up and lend a hand. There's strength in numbers, obviously, and now's our time as hunters and fishermen to step up and do the work in the trenches, do the dirty work to make sure that this is around for future generations.
Awesome stuff there, Jared. I appreciate you coming on and covering some of these issues. And like you said, they're not easy. It gets a little messy at times, but someone's got to do it. And appreciate an organization like Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and guys like yourself that are willing to donate their time and, fight for public lands and fight for what we love. And hats off to you. I appreciate you coming on. Do you have anything this spring? Are you going turkey hunting, or you have any fishing trip, anything you're looking forward to? Or have you applied? What's going on in that arena?
Yeah, all kinds of stuff, actually. I'm looking forward to this summer and to next fall, hopefully, if I'm lucky enough to draw some tags. So coming up here, I'm going to take my daughter turkey hunting for the first time, and then I'm going to do some turkey hunting myself. And then we've got a family vacation planned up along the Boundary Waters area in northern Minnesota with my wife's family and extended family. We're going to take our kids up there for a few weeks. We'll be heading to the Compton Traditional Bow Hunters Rendezvous in Michigan, in between here and our trip up north. And then I've got my applications in for Arizona, obviously. I'm hoping to draw an elk tag this year. And then I put in for elk in Colorado as well. And if I don't draw, I'll be back in Colorado with an over-the-counter archery tag, one way or the other.
Right on. And you said something about a bow hunters rendezvous. Doesn't backcountry hunters and anglers usually have a rendezvous type thing in the summer?
Great point. Thanks for bringing that up, Jay. Our rendezvous is actually coming up next week. It's April 1 through 3. It's in Missoula, Montana. We do it every year. And this year's been overwhelming. We're already sold out for our Saturday banquet. We have a brew fest on Friday night, where we have 23 Montana-only breweries, 46 different beers, a couple of cideries. We have our keynote speaker for our banquet on Saturday is Stephen Rudella of Meat Eater fame, and we're glad to have him there again. Randy Newberg is giving a seminar. Just a great group of folks that's all get together in the name of conservation and protecting our public land and habitat. And so that takes place next week, and I'm pretty excited to be heading out there for that.
Awesome. We'll enjoy it and keep up the great work, like I said, and thanks for coming on.
All right, I appreciate it.
All right, take care.